Welcome to Beyond the Headlights,
where we turn our pain into purpose
and raise our voices against drunk driving.
So today on Beyond the Headlights, we have a very special guest, and we're very, very excited about it. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Jen Wamsganz. It's Wamsganz.
We asked her to do that.
Yes.
We cannot say it properly.
And yes, and I am so excited to be here and just love everything you guys are doing.
I feel like we've talked for a while about wanting to have guests, so
Yeah.
to have you as our first guest is a big
so
deal.
Exciting.
So we know each other from
Yes.
MAD.
Yes.
You are you're the superstar volunteer. You're the volunteer at MAD.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
Destiny has met you recently, and I just will go back for just a quick second. You were my first connection at MAD.
Yes.
And you were my lifesaver and my best friend, and my family is in love with you. And there's nobody else that we would rather have for a first interview than
Yes. Awesome. Thank
There's
you so
just
much.
like a
I appreciate
bright
it.
light that surrounds you and like so much positivity.
Thank you so much.
Very true.
Yes.
So that being said, you have helped so many victims and their families. You volunteer at the victim impact panels.
Yes.
You volunteer at the saturation events. You do so much for the Heroes for Heroes dinner that we talked about on the last episode.
So amazing.
Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start working with MAD?
Sure, of course. So one, thank you for all your kind words. I love your family. I hate meeting people like you because both of you, it's just everyone I've met, it's like I've met through a tragedy, which is awful. And so like most people, I got involved with MAD in 2011 after I lost my cousin David. This is David. David and I were just like the cousins that you just are like brother and sister, where you fight like brother and sister. You just love them like brother and sister. We came from a very close North County Catholic family, if you're from St. Louis. And he was just the coolest. He was the fun guy. He was very sweet. Just lit up the room when he walked in. Everyone loved Dave. We always laughed. In 2011, when he passed, Facebook wasn't like Facebook is now, right? Where David had 600 friends on Facebook when he passed away.
That was probably a ton.
Right. And it's like, we always laughed about that. We even, in writing like eulogies for someone who is 30 years old, you should never have to do. But like my cousins and I sat around to write Dave's eulogy, right? And it's like, we talked about that. Like he had 600 friends on Facebook. Like I think I had 35 at the time. Right. Yes. But Dave was killed by an impaired driver. So we joined a group that no one wants to join, right? So we had all been together on Mother's Day. And then it happened 3 days after Mother's Day, and it was 2 days before his 30th birthday. So obviously a huge shock for all of us. We had just seen him. I always joke, Dave had tattoos, like sleeves of tattoos all over.
So he was a cool guy.
He was very cool, very cool. And I had no tattoos. And so at the winery, because our whole family was together at the winery, and we just had this wonderful day where we were all spent the day together. Kids were running around playing. We all were just hanging out outside. It was Mother's Day. We did like a brunch. And I'll just never forget him sitting there talking to me about he was going to propose. We were all going to Boston for a wedding. He was going to propose to his then girlfriend, and just talking about tattoos and different things. And it's just, those are those things, where you're just like, see you later, Dave. I'll see you probably on your birthday, because we had this huge party planned for his birthday. He was turning 30. And so we had this huge party planned to all go to Fairmount Park because he loved the horse races. My grandma loved the horse races. And so we had all of his friends and family were going. We had even like sponsored a race for his birthday. That was like, it was already planned. So then I got the call. And I'll never forget, my mom had rushed over to sit with my cousin's children, Dave's sister's children, that he had been in a crash. And it was there was no information. So when the hospital calls and there's no information, it's like, you know it's bad. And my
what
mom
time
is
of
a
the day
nurse.
was this?
So his crash happened around 6:15, 6:30 in the evening. So it wasn't a 2 a.m. crash. Like, our story is not unique, right?
I always try to.
Right.
I always ask because, like, I feel like most of the world thinks that this happens at like 2 a.m.
Absolutely.
or 3 a.m. But in reality, it's
nothing good happens
like,
after midnight, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we always tell. That's what I tell my kids. But no, Dave's was, and that's what's always crazy
dinner.
to me about Dave's story is Dave, that day, he had gone to work. He worked for like the railroad. He did something, I don't know, whatever. But he was on his way home from work, and another cousin of ours got caught up at work and wasn't going to be able to go home and let his dogs out. So he calls Dave and he's like, hey, can you let the dogs out? And that's like what we would do. Like, if you needed help, you called Dave. Like, that was just what you did. So he wasn't even supposed to be on that highway, right? Like, he wasn't even supposed to be there. So he goes to St. Charles, lets the dogs out, then ends up coming back and took Highway 370 back, which is where he was killed, right in front of the Mills Mall. A lady who was about 42 years old, coming home from a happy hour after work, switched lanes suddenly, and both of their cars overturned. He was killed fairly instantly, and from what we understand from being told by police and things like that. And she survived. She walked away. She had very minor injuries that, was in the hospital for just
Was he
a small
wearing a
period of time.
seatbelt?
So he was not wearing a seatbelt. I believe she was not wearing hers either, but don't quote me on that. I'm not positive. But yeah, so both cars overturned. His car doesn't even look like a normal car crash. Like, it's so destroyed. Like, there's no way anyone would have survived.
Like somebody crumpled up and paper
Yes.
into a ball.
And that's where it's like, you think about a car overturning, and it's crazy the amount of damage when you actually see the car. We all ended up going to the hospital. The whole family went, right? Like, it was kind of like an all call.
Sorry to interrupt. So you think he passed right away?
Yes.
But they took him anyway?
They took him anyway because he was able to donate his organs. Which was a big thing for our family, actually. It ends up being a big part of our story because he broke his neck, but he was still technically alive. So they took him to the hospital. And then at the hospital is when they determined, hey, and it's really, again, this is stuff that people don't always talk or know about. But so my aunt and uncle are devastated. They know he's gone. And the first thing out of their mouths is, we need to know within the next 30 minutes if you are willing to donate organs, because he didn't sign the back of his license.
And you're still in shock. So, like, how do you make such decisions? You've probably barely been able to call everybody.
It goes back to those conversations and how important they are. And I've been preaching that mostly about talk to your kids, have a plan, know what's going to happen if they're out at a party and they do drink. Don't be naive to say that, oh, my child would never do that.
Right.
But that's a conversation with your family, too.
But a conversation with even, 16-year-old drivers. Like, if you are in a crash, do you want your organs donated? Do you want, and those are things that you don't want to.
Your body takes over and says, yes, he absolutely wants to donate
This is what they wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And after going through what we've all been through, we now know to have those tough conversations that we probably wouldn't have ever had before.
Right.
Like, why?
And he was able to donate 11 organs, which was amazing, considering how rough the crash was.
Yeah.
So that became a big part of my aunt and uncle's healing, and really the whole family.
I get that.
Which is very, it was kind of a unique way for us to kind of enter there, because, like I said, that night, if you would have asked us at the ER, everyone was almost like upset with the doctors when they were talking to you about it, just because they are so frank about this is our timeline and this is what we need.
Yeah, it's very urgent for them, and it's also, I think they get desensitized because it's their job. They
Absolutely.
see it every day.
Right. And even myself now, so the crash was May 11th, 2011. So it's been some time. And I'm very desensitive. Like, I can tell his story without getting upset anymore, which is very...
We've talked about that, too.
Yeah.
Like, it makes me sad to hear your story, and it makes me sad to hear Jennifer's story. But, like, my own story, like, I don't even cry anymore, But, like, if I hear yours, like, I'm more apt to cry. I'm like,
and
oh,
there
my
are...
goodness.
Every story is so different and so heartbreaking that it's... and like I've said, I've heard so many, unfortunately, so many stories over the last, 15 years. But the big thing is every single story is important. No matter if it's a physical injury, if it's a death, if it's just someone ran into your mailbox. Yeah. Like, I always tell people that, right, it was 100% preventable. So that lady, like I said, she was 42. She knew she was playing the game, right?
Did she have prior convictions?
She did not have any prior, but she blew a .158. Now, I do believe, which I know you guys have talked about before, that people drive more than 80 times drunk before they actually get caught. Based on stories we've heard, I don't doubt that happened at some point. Also, so we were very lucky. She pled guilty. Obviously, she survived, so she pled guilty. So we didn't have to go through this big, long trial.
Yeah.
But she ended up getting 6 years in the Department of Corrections.
How did that make you feel? Did you feel like it was sufficient?
So, what's funny is my family was, again, everyone's journey with grief is different. Everyone's journey with how they deal with impaired driving is different. My family was very much, we didn't want to know her name. We didn't really want to.
I talked to Deb about that.
So even my aunt, we always laugh.
Years before she found out.
Right.
See, and I was complete opposite. Like, I wanted to know everything there was.
Yeah,
to
where
know
had they
about
been?
the
What had they,
person.
we have no idea. We know she was at a happy hour. We have no idea where. But we were so focused on, we've got to do something to change this because this is a problem. So we didn't.
So you heard that pretty instantly.
Oh, very. It was it was actually, so Dave's crash was in May. That Christmas, our family was like, what do we do? Like at Christmas, sitting around talking about Dave, talking about kids opening presents. Yeah. We literally were like, hey, what can we do to help bring awareness to this, to change it, because like I said, I came from a Catholic, we come from a family of people who drink.
Right. So gardens.
Yes, it's like very much, and it's an everyday thing. And so we really, for us, it was really important to be like, hey, how do we change the narrative for Dave? We don't want him, he will not die in vain for us, right? Like we will not let that happen. He was such a big part of our lives that we won't let that. So literally, right? I mean, that May, it was May, it was just a couple months later, we were all talking about it at family stuff, all the cousins, all the aunts and uncles. And that's really how ultimately we ended up with MAD, because MAD was there. We had reached out to them when the crash happened, just knowing we were going to need help with the court system because we didn't know anything about it. And so them being there, helping us through the victim impact statements, things like that. It was such a big deal for us to have people that understood that this is a crime that was preventable and that there's nothing we could do to stop it, right?
I think oftentimes people think that the justice system, I think that TV portrays that the justice system moves quickly. Really does, it makes you think that it. So this happened in May. When was she actually sentenced, and how long did you all have to go through that?
So it wasn't until June of the next year.
June of 2012.
And the reason why I know that is because my cousin Kara and I were pregnant. So Kara was Dave's sister.
Okay.
She was pregnant and I was pregnant, and she was due in June and I was due in September. And Kara went into the labor the day of the sentencing. Wow. And my Aunt Debbie did not want to give a victim impact statement. She had written it out. Wow. She did not want to do it. She didn't want to look at the lady. She didn't want to see her. She really struggled with, because in her mind that it was just going to be really, really hard. She didn't know. Yeah. I think in her mind, she knew if she showed up to court and that lady wasn't sad and remorseful, if she didn't respond that way, I think my aunt would have been crushed. Yeah. So I think, so we always laugh.
She was protecting herself.
We're always like, Dave, we're always like, hey, Dave, we could use some help on the weather for this event. We're like, Dave totally stepped in and was like, Mom, don't worry about it. Go deal with the grandbaby. And so like she went into labor that same day.
I think with the victim impact panels for that same reason.
I couldn't look at them at victim impact panels and know that, like, to see their face and know that it didn't matter. Like, how did my baby and my husband not mean enough to, like, make them change their thoughts? So it's too hard for me.
That's so important to say, though.
Yes.
Because it's okay that she handled it that
Absolutely.
way. It worked out fine.
Yeah.
It's okay that you handled it that way. It
well,
worked
no,
out
and
fine.
it's okay. And that's the thing, too, is, like, there's, again, like, my aunt didn't want to know anything about the offender. But other people, they need to know where they live, what happened to them, where they're going, like
I've
to
said
the point of
multiple
hire
times that
investigators.
I am nosy, okay?
Well, no, and it's like to the point of like and that's okay too. It's part of whatever is in our brains that makes us deal with grief, like whatever your family needs, that's what they
Everyone
need,
copes
right?
and grieves differently.
And that's where I think the biggest thing with, like I said, with us, with MAD, you know, there's not a ton of impaired driving organizations out there. Now that we've been involved with MAD, obviously, actually in Missouri, we're super lucky because we do have, now you guys, we have Think First. We have MoDOT has phenomenal programs like Buckle Up, Phone Down. Like there's so many really good, the Bill DeMott Foundation is out of Florida. They're fabulous. There's a bunch of really good organizations. Even Cecilia Williams, Angels of Advocacy is a great, like back in 2011.
Because we're all reaching different niches or niches or however.
Well, and it's all the same fight for me, at least. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, I'll talk to anyone, anywhere, because it is. It's all the same. Where, yes, I've always been a MAD girl just because were there for us and will continue to be there, I know. But it's all the same fight. Like it's all the same purpose. It's all that getting back to no more victims of impaired driving, which I love. That was always my favorite tagline that MAD did come up with, was that no more victims or no more empty seats, some people say, or things like that. Because it is. That's what's, when you think about it, it is that you could get to a world with that if people make the choice to, if you consume alcohol, you don't drive.
Time that, and this is kind of off what you're saying, and I don't want to take too much of a detour, but the tobacco industry, that seemed like an insurmountable thing to get people to quit smoking.
And no one hardly ever smokes it, but my husband.
Kids.
Right.
So the kids would go home and say, "Ew, Dad, you're smoking."
Well, like Dare. Like I remember in 8th grade being in Dare, and like I went home and I'd be like, "My dad smokes. Ew." Right. You know what I mean?
I would say the no more victims thing is not an insurmountable task because we've done it before with nicotine.
Right. No, for sure.
There ended up being different avenues of nicotine, of course. But nicotine also doesn't make you drive your car into a family.
Correct.
You really don't see people smoking hardly anymore. It's a good point.
No, it is. It's very, and that's where I think
that's what gives me.
No, I think I always say the young people, and that's where I think my biggest struggle is always that generation of, and it's normally men, unfortunately. I feel like, just to generalize.
Well, you've seen it.
Right. When we do our victim impact panels, which is a big part of what I'm involved with MAD. When we sit there and we register and people are walking in, it's amazing that almost like the baby boomer generation or whatever, and even my like end of the millennial, whatever, just that attitude of, it's all right, like, I'm fine. I've done it so many times. It's
now. I feel like it's really not that big.
Right. The person that took Dave was in her 40s.
Yeah,
the
she was in her 40s.
The person who took my family was in her 40s. All of us lost our family from a girl, like a female. You know, like because we just said males.
Yeah, we just said males, but
I used to think before this happened to me that this was something that mainly just guys did. Like I just didn't think like a girl would do this. You know, like it sounds weird, but like. We're all sitting at this table, and it was all women. Yeah, you're very right. But it's very just. But whatever it is about that, and those are that age group. I will say the young. When I run into young people who've had a DWI, they are like, we messed up big time. Like they're super accountable for it. Where I feel like as you get older, I don't know. It's just either you just have done it so many times, you're fine, or you're just like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and nobody's going to tell me anything different. And that's the hardest for me. I rarely get discouraged with
fighting impaired driving.
You're so
Rarely
cute.
get inserted. I am like on it all the time.
I need you.
It's very motivating to me. I get when I meet someone who's like, oh, let's talk about impaired, or like, oh, well, it was their first time. I'm always like, oh, it's cool. I got this. I got you all day on this one. But when I meet someone who's had 3 or 4, and I'm like, nothing,
or
like
6.
You're not exactly like nothing, like you're not feeling, you're not understanding.
I talked before on this podcast about the survey that
Yes.
at the end of the victim impact panel, and how it's anonymous. We have no idea who submits them, but one of the questions is, what number is this for you?
Yeah.
How many DWIs, DUIs have you had, and how much money have you spent on it? And at the end, we do look through them. Again, we don't know who wrote them.
See, I'm nosy. I'll come to that part. I want to know.
But we do look through
Right.
them, and it is shocking.
It's absolutely shocking. And I love that people are so, I will say, I love that people are so honest with us. I do think, I always laugh. So we have, so I've been speaking at panels for, probably 6 years, 7 years. Not as long as I've been doing other things with MAB, but long enough that I've been through a lot of panels. And I will never forget, we had one where, because I think people, when they show up to a panel, especially a MAD victim impact panel, you sign all this waiver, like when you sign up, you pay your money, the court tells you have to go to a panel, right? Mm-hmm. Which is phenomenal. And we thank all the courts that send them to us, because MAD panels are in person.
Yeah.
There is an online option you could do, but
just don't feel like
most
that's
people are
as impactful if
no.
it's
And I
online.
will say most courts now are leaning towards that, sending them to in person.
Mm-hmm.
So we have lots of options in the St. Louis area, which is awesome. But having them come and sit and listen to these stories, but we always come from a standpoint of education, where I feel like when I first started speaking, I just wanted to yell at them, right?
Yeah.
I was so like,
I feel
just, like,
feel it.
want to yell at them and be like, whatever.
That makes sense, because at the beginning you always say, we are not angry moms with
Right.
pitchforks. And
Right.
then I usually get up and say, oh,
Well,
wait.
I'm kind of
I
angry. Well, and that's where I think, so it's always funny to me, because it's like you watch their faces, because they come in, and then as soon as I say, hey, we don't know why you're here.
Yeah.
We know you did something wrong. Mm-hmm. We don't know what it is. And we're not going to judge you. We just want you to know what it's like on this side of the table. And I feel like they get like, okay,
They let down their
that's
wall.
fair.
You
That's
really
fair.
can see them relax.
Yeah, it's fair. Like, I'm not going to yell at you. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to do that. Like, you
already know what you did was wrong.
I hope someone at home is already yelling at you, whether it's a spouse or a parent or whoever, a child. But I'm like, that I think is so important, that people know, even when you make this grave mistake in my eyes, you can change. You can make that change. That change is probably easier than most changes you already need making in your life, right? Like, this is an easy fix.
Especially in this day and age where it's so easy to pick up your phone that you already have in your hand and just call for a ride.
Absolutely. And Uber, that $30 Uber ride versus a $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 attorney fee.
Right. Well, and
What is
we have
it?
a gentleman that speaks a lot of times on the same night I speak, and he's had 3 DWIs and 6 careless and imprudence, and
so he speaks and shares his side of it.
Does.
Yes.
That's
And
amazing.
He's sober for 40 years? 20
It's
years?
29,
Ooh.
30.
I
It's
think
going to be
30
30.
years.
Yeah.
Let's get him on here.
Yeah. He's an interesting character.
So he likes to tell everybody he loved the 70s. And
Sounds like a fun time to be alive.
Yes.
I wouldn't know.
Yes. He always says
stop.
better living through chemistry days is
And
what
we
he
were
says.
talking about like Dave's accident, crash in 2011. And I was like, I was graduating. And you're like,
Right.
it's so long ago. I was like, stop. Don't say it was so long ago.
Yes,
So
yes.
I just graduated.
Yeah, I know. It's so sad.
We don't need to talk about how young you are.
A baby.
But
Baby.
he likes to say, at the end of one of the things that he talks about is he likes to travel now. And so he spends money on traveling, and he'll say, who spent this much money or this much money? Well, for $10,000, you could travel the world pretty much. You could go to some amazing vacations. So just give it some thought. Maybe take a vacation instead of,
Right.
But he's an example of change.
Right.
He's
Oh, absolutely.
all over
Absolutely.
change.
And I will say, and he knows, like, he was a full-blown narcissist, like alcoholic, like everything you think of when it comes to an alcoholic. And I remember one of the first times I heard him speak, I was like, Are we good at this?
Yeah,
are we good with this?
Are we allowing this to
Right.
this
And
kind of
then
talk?
it was like the more he shared, every time we speak with Jim, someone comes up afterwards and talks to him
They
about.
can relate to him.
They do.
And they absolutely relate to him, almost more than they relate to me or someone who's lost a family or someone who's been injured. They relate to him. And I think it's so important for people who have been in his shoes to share their success after, because I think another thing with impaired driving is there's a lot of like shame and guilt from it especially if you're with a family like mine. So we always laugh. I'm like the fun police, right? Like that's my new role in life is where people are like, oh, she's the mad girl. Like, you know, like if you're at...
It's crazy that you mentioned that because...
Right, exactly.
People do look at me different.
Yes.
Like,
so, for example, with my kids' sports teams, right?
Yes.
So I have kids that play club sports where we're always doing fundraisers
It's your
and different
whole life.
things, right? And so, we'll do what's like one of the best fundraisers for a baseball team.
Barrel of booze.
Booze basket, right? Or the big cooler full of booze where you sell raffle tickets. Well, anytime my son's team has done one of those, I always put in myself a $50 Uber gift card. And I always put a note.
So good. How did I never think of that?
And I always put a note that says, if your plans involve alcohol, make sure you plan to get a safe ride home. And I just put that in there, and I told the parents straight up. I said, hey, I am totally fine with us doing this basket. I know it's going to raise a lot of money, but I think we need to.
That is so
but I'm like,
obvious. But like, how did we never think of that? Like, I always fight the barrel of booze or the booze basket.
Right.
But like,
where it's like the booze is not the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it raises money. It raises tons of money every time. And so I always make it very clear to the baseball parents, like, hey, this is totally fine with me. But I think if we're raising young men, we need to be, these kids are right now, they're 12, 13. They're going to be 13, 14, 15 very soon. We need to be saying, hey, this is super fun raffle basket that someone's going to enjoy, but look at this. This is being responsible, right? And that's my thing is
because we're not telling you not to drink, just be responsible when doing so.
Right. And if I'm going to preach this, like, I got to start with my own family versus, you know, expecting someone else's family to make that change. Amazing. So
goes back to conversations too.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
You know, if your kids weren't on that team, maybe those kids wouldn't have had those conversations.
Right.
Maybe they would, but.
Right. Well, and we always laugh though, because I'm like, it is that like kind of fun police. You know, they know when I'm there. They're like, oh, there, Jen's, like, whatever. But I'm like, I'm okay being the fun police if it's gonna save your family.
It's always
is that weird?
For me.
Like if it's gonna save your family, I'm okay being the fun police because I know that if I say, hey, I feel like you've had too many, can I call you an Uber and pay for it? Like I will protect. I'm not just protecting you, like I'm protecting everyone else on the road. And that's the other thing with victim impact panels is it's such a community event. And these are people in our community that are committing this crime. Yeah. So being able to stand in front of them and say, I'm here giving up my time because I actually care about you and your family. And I really actually care about the community. Yeah. And I care that Dave died and we can't ever bring him back. And so we have to make sure everyone knows his name and his story so that we can all try to move forward together.
Everything that you say is so peppered with kindness. I just love it. Everything is positive. It's sweet. It's kind. And it's for the greater good. So
it really is.
I think that you have an amazing gift to see the goodness in the tragedy, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So hard.
Well, and I will say, I think, and this is just Jen philosophy over here. I think with MAD, we always joke, we always talk about crash versus accident, right? So we are big
notice
crash.
I've already caught myself. Like
we are big crash, like crash,
it's
crash,
a crash. It wasn't an accident.
It was not an accident. It was a crash. But we also walk a fine line with victim and survivor. Because there are some people who are like, I am not a victim, I am a survivor. Like that mentality of
And I feel like you could be both.
And that's where I always say, I feel everyone on this journey, everyone starts as a victim because a crime was committed against you, right? No matter what happened, whether someone ran into your house, someone ran into you, someone ran you over with a car, like whatever brought you to this impaired driving story, you started as a victim. And I think you transition to survivor over the years, right? Where you don't have that. You don't need to be a victim anymore because
you learn how to survive and thrive.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Where I think that transition happens, and once that happens, then you move more towards advocate, and then you move towards other things. It's like, but you can't.
With the growth and healing.
You can't get to survivor or an advocate until you've started as a victim and healed. You know what I mean? So I think that's where, for me, that journey is always, I see it in people that I've worked with. Seen it in you know what I mean, and families. Like, it's, you start to see them be like, okay, like this is my life now, and it's a new normal.
It kind of it comes with acceptance too, accepting your reality, which I feel like can be so hard to do, but the moment you do
at the beginning too, and I'll touch on the victim part. At the beginning, we were told we were not the victims,
right? And
I was like, well, I sure feel like a victim. This really hurts,
right? And
so I think that there is so much to be said about not getting over it, and so many people, well-wishing people that say things that they shouldn't say, like, you'll get over this. I probably will never.
No, you probably will
You'll
never.
learn how to carry it.
Yeah. But the healing part, and it being compared to a scar, the scar will never go away, but it will heal.
Yes.
And so that does coincide exactly with what you said. At the beginning, you're raw and open and suffering, but as time goes on, you do heal, and the scar does scab over, and you are able to handle things better than you did before at the beginning.
And I do think that's why, so MADD, MADD's evolved over the years, right? So it started in the 80s with a mom, Candace Leitner, lost her daughter. There was no laws around impaired driving. And then it's like around the table, grassroots, grassroots movement around the table, very community-based. Pretty much how I would love it to still be sometimes, I think. And it's grown into this huge national organization, which is challenging, has challenges, obviously, because there are things that happen in Florida that in Missouri it doesn't match with what what our worries here are so different than certain worries there versus Montana versus it is where you live does make a big difference in what you're dealing with.
And that goes back to the legislators.
Exactly. And so and I feel like with MADD, as things have changed and evolved over time, there's been such great change and so many great things that have happened. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to that small community MADD office, which was always MADD Heartland for me, which is the smaller kind of St. Louis, Missouri area. And so when we started with that, when you start with victim services first, which is what it should always be, then it's so easy to branch off into these other areas of prevention, education, legislation. You know what I mean?
Services, that's like the people that jump in right after.
Right,
correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So as soon as a crash happens, and either they contact MADD or MADD hears about the crash and reaches out to them.
Which is good that MADD is reaching out, because I know that with my crash, we had lawyers calling like crazy. You know what I mean? Amongst everyone else in the news. Yeah. I was living under a microscope. Right. I don't know.
Which is something that doesn't support. People don't think about that too, is where, when you lose someone, God forbid, to illness or things like that, you rarely have news media calling your house asking you right away how you're feeling.
They were in the hospital with me. Right. They came to my hospital room.
It's crazy how quickly you have to face with it. You're faced with that, hey, you have to deal with this death or serious injury, and you also have to deal with just grief in general, and then also how to handle it from there, what's happening, getting information, plus people asking you questions.
Right. Having somebody help you navigate that has to relieve so much stress.
Yeah, and that's where we really like I said, with our family in particular, we didn't know anything about. Yeah. And everything we knew was from Law and Order, and that was just not very accurate.
Doesn't move as fast.
You in the courtroom.
Yeah, so they went to courtroom, and then that's something that in the future then I was able to do with other families, and that's something that I really have grown to love.
Well, speaking with Jennifer, like that taught me that it was more than just sitting in the courtroom and hearing a sentencing. Like you're collecting data, and I didn't realize how important that would be either. Because again, when you were telling me about sitting in a courtroom, I was like, I can't imagine listening to somebody get sentenced only 6 years for taking my family. But like, it's so much more than the sentencing. There's so much more.
Too, is the court monitors, who are just data mining, really.
Yeah.
And then the victim
services.
Yes.
Specialists.
And so victim services, they sit with the families. They pull in other volunteers to sit with the families too, just to show support, almost like
sheltering them with love, you know.
Well, and it is, and I've seen it in a couple different instances where I'll never forget. We were with a family one time, and again, this was all, you know, that MAD has staff. And they can't be everywhere, so they have people that like me who are and they have a training. It's called VATI, which is I should know what it stands for. It's like Victims Assistance Training Institution or something, and it's where we went through a 2-week long training of because that's one thing MAD. Well, and I will say that's one thing MAD is one thing about the organization that's great is they're very protective of families. Yeah. So they recommend that you don't do anything, speak, attend things, that you just kind of live in your new world for 1 year after like sentencing. If you have sentencing.
Yeah. And sentencing, like it happened for you all in a year, but I felt like that was really quick because I remember my lawyer told me that if we had a shot at anything, you were hoping at 2+ years, you know, and like that's longer than I would have ever expected.
A case, right, and then
flipped everything on its head.
Even worse, yes. So, but that, and some people are like, well, I want to speak now. Like, I'm ready to roll. Like, let's do this. Where
you're living in such a fog, you don't know what you truly want,
and
or
you don't
need to survive.
know what's going to trigger you. And I think that's the thing is especially in court, because in your case, you never had to sit through a court hearing. In our case, we really didn't either. They just went straight to, you know, it was like we had continuances and
that
then
was
sentencing.
Probably triggering in itself.
Right, because it just gets pushing. But then if you have to go, and this is what people don't understand is, I mean, obviously the individual that committed the crime, they have rights. And those rights, even though as victims' rights, I know,
like we
have none.
Right. Well, that's the thing is, like I have none. There's a victim's rights, but those are not at the time of that case. That's not where your rights exist, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard. And you know, I don't want to live in a world where you're not proven guilty until you're proven innocent until guilty. You need due process.
So was his person that hit him? Like, was she in jail while you were waiting for court, or was she out?
No, she was out free.
See, I can't.
Which is
I can't
hard.
imagine that part. Like, that just makes it seem so much harder for me.
There's such a balance.
Yes.
You're right. Like, we are on the victim side, so it's hard to see.
Right.
Yes, she did have rights. She did get to go back out. There was a chance. What if she was wrongly convicted?
Right. And that's where it is and it's hard to know, especially knowing like the facts of the case, right? Where it's like you have this case and it's, you know, we think, oh, it's so open and shut, but DWI work is so difficult. And that's why I am like, those officers that are dedicated to DWIs are
heroes,
legit heroes every single day, every single one of them, because there are people out there, attorneys, whose job is to find the holes in the work. And it's and with a DWI, there's so many, the blood draw, the, you know, breathalyzer, where they did SFSTs was the lights shining in the background. Yes, field sobriety test.
I didn't realize how like technical it was too until like I started talking with you more, because I didn't even think about the court side of things since I never got that opportunity, which I'm so thankful I didn't. Because there's so many loopholes that people don't realize.
Well, and then the other thing is, if you have a guy, you know, you have, you know, 2 law enforcement officers there and one's training, and so he's going to be training on your case, like, you know, it makes a big where it's like that person versus 20 who has 20 years on the job, who's been writing DWIs for years. Like, well, we can't pick who's going to do this. I want the young guy to learn for sure, but maybe not on my case. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Learn somebody's, but not mine, please.
But also, it's so that part of it is so technical, and that's why it does take a long time to get to trial. People don't realize that when you're starting to go through the process, and that's where MAD is super helpful, because literally, I remember sitting at one point in time, we had a trial that lasted almost 2 weeks.
Wow.
In Jefferson County.
That's not the norm, correct?
Not the norm. This was a very, very long, there was a lot of witnesses. There was a lot of evidence. It was a very convoluted case. In that case alone, I learned, even as someone who had been around for 10, 12 years, like I learned more in that case than I've learned on anything else, just because of anything that could go wrong went wrong. And also it was just the facts of the case were difficult. Like, it was just a very difficult case, and it was a fatality. It was multiple fatalities. And so sitting with that family and knowing, you know, you're sitting in a courtroom and you're listening to things and you cannot react.
Right.
You can't cry. You can't be like, oh, that's not right. And like, you know, you can't move. You have to sit there.
So
if you are a victim and you want to be in that room, you can't move. And sometimes I feel like I come off as like the mean advocate, where I'm like, here's the deal. If you're going to be in this trial and you're going to sit and watch, you can't make a sound, because you don't want to do
something that could cause
a mistrial. Absolutely. So if you are sitting in the courtroom and they're playing a video of the crash and you start crying and you run out of the courtroom,
I couldn't do it.
The jury's seeing that, and you're influencing the jury against the defendant. So that's not okay. You have to sit there and either take it or you sit outside. Right. Like, and that's part of victim services that's really difficult.
And that's why I have not done victim services yet, because I can't.
Right.
Well, that, and I already know that there's nothing I can do or say to fix the wound that this person has.
Right.
And so I'm a fixer, you know what I mean? And like, I feel like it would be such a trigger.
It's
like,
really, and that's where there's, you know, people talk about, oh, how do you, like, where do you volunteer? You know, what's, you know, your specialty or whatever. And I love it all. Like, I really do genuinely love all parts of it. I do think victim services is the hardest and is one that not everyone can do. Same with victim impact panels.
It's almost ripping off your own Band-Aid again.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Everyone is great at going to a saturation event and supporting officers before they go out for the night. Everyone can do that, right?
Yeah.
Everyone can go to the
Heroes Dinner.
Yeah, everyone can go.
That was good. I like that.
Yeah, everyone can go to like a
Y'all did a
walk
great
event. You know, everyone can do those things, but not every volunteer. Because most of our volunteer base, I mean, everyone's been affected in some way. Mm-hmm. So it's not everyone can do those things, and it does take time. And that's one of those things where it's just, and it may never be something. Yeah. There's still people I know who volunteer for the organization who can never do a victim impact panel because they can't be in a room with that many offenders. They can't see that every month.
Yeah.
That's neat.
And we've had that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's totally fine. There is always a place for everyone. Absolutely.
I could talk one-on-one
side of that
to
is,
somebody.
Destiny, that I walk in and I see all of the potential that I didn't get in Gracie's situation. Mm-hmm. So those 4 kids could be the 4 faces that I see out in.
Right.
But then I also struggle, like, just talking to kids, because I feel like so many people focus on, we have to change the younger generation. We have to make an impact. But what about their parents that are teaching them that this is okay when they go drink their 3rd margarita at a Mexican restaurant, or they go to their happy hour after, like, you know what I mean? Like, so I struggle because it wasn't necessarily a teen that killed my family, but it was a mom.
It was a grown person.
A mom, you know, whereas yours is teens.
No, and I get that. And I think that's the beauty of MAD too, though, is there is a place for everybody.
Everyone has a spot.
Well, and that's where, you know, we were even at one point, there's support groups, right? Different support groups. And we talked about, like, in Illinois, there's an advocate, Christy, who's phenomenal. And she is victim services only. Wow. That's her baby. And she has support groups for, like, all different kind of categories of families. And so she has people who have lost spouses, people who have lost children, and then also people who are injured and coping. Because I remember one time we had, you know, a couple years ago, there was a lady who attended. She was a physical injury case. So she hurt her leg, her back, kind of multiple injuries, she attended the support group, and everyone that night in the support group had lost someone. And she was like, well, geez.
I don't relate.
And then she felt so
probably survivor's guilt in a
yes
sense.
like she
I'm
felt
sad
so
that I lived,
why am I feeling like a victim? These people have these where
because that goes back to where like everyone else's story always feels so much worse than your own. You know what I mean? Like she was like, and I was like, oh, absolutely, you should not feel that way, one, but I totally understand why you would feel that way, because everyone in this group, there's death and sadness. And she's like, well, geez, I just wanted someone to talk to about my victim impact statement and, you know, what she should say. And I felt like she was like, oh, I'm not that much of a victim anymore. Where I'm like, that's not true at all. Like you're still a victim. Yeah. And that's where I think for me, meeting people over the years, and I always, you know, you're Grace's cousin that I love so much. Yes. I love her because she's already like wanting to do things and talk. But I'm like, her and I are like kindred spirits, because I remember someone one time being like, oh, it was like just your cousin. Just your cousin.
And I was like, what do you mean it was just my cousin? Like, this was my dude. Yeah. Like, even if it was my best friend.
Even if
like,
it was just your cousin. Like,
right.
He was your cousin. Like, you still loved him.
This was my family. Yeah. Like, these are my people.
He should
like,
still be here, no matter who he was.
That's a very frustrating part of grief.
Right.
Is people will always compare your story to theirs.
Right.
And there's always like a hierarchy of
right.
loss. It's not right, but I think it might be normal.
Yes.
I think like our human nature.
I absolutely.
That always got me was you're young and you can remarry and have more kids. So then it diminished the fact that I didn't already have that
didn't exist.
I didn't need more.
Right, right.
But yeah.
No, that is
and
very.
Marilyn, I think, is probably her, and I shouldn't have said her name probably, but her and my other nieces and nephews, they're probably why I feel so strongly in planting that seed.
Yeah.
Like they've seen the pain.
Yeah.
They can talk to their friends. They can go to school and say, you know,
their
the
voice
older
is so
one
powerful.
Is at the prom age now. And she actually knew the 15-year-old that was also in the crash. So she had the double whammy. And it was also 12 hours before her birthday. And her and Grace were like this.
Right.
And so if she sees someone, you know, she's all over them.
Oh, absolutely.
She's the fun police.
Right. Yeah. It is. And that's where I think, too, you know, unfortunately, we're getting to a time when you do talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh, yeah, you know, when I say, oh, people ask different, what do you do? Or how do you volunteer? You know, and they'll be like, oh, I volunteer with Matt at some others drunk driving, you know, blah, blah, whatever.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, yeah, when my dad was hit by a drunk driver in, you know, 2019 or whatever, you know, like this, but it's just like, oh yeah, they had a fender bender or whatever, and I'm like, but like your family was impacted, like he could have passed away, like there's so many things that
you got lucky.
I think that's a good point too, because somebody almost always has a story of somebody who they lost or somebody that they knew that was killed by a drunk driver, injured by a drunk driver. So if that's the case, and if we always say 2 out of 3 people will be impacted, we're telling you this is a true number. You will probably be impacted.
Right.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
And it's very scary. Oh yeah, absolutely, all the time. And it is, and like I said, there's just so many, you know, and watching every family go through the process differently, whether it's, you know, they pled guilty or not, where they sentence appropriately or not. You know, there's just that part of it is so difficult. And I do think as a volunteer, you know, as families, you become this family of, you know, just like you guys know, like you're like a family. These are your people.
Yeah.
And that never ends. No. And so there's still people that'll reach out.
Where that, like the scar that's open, the wound that's open, it is almost like a transplant. Like you're giving us something to put over our wound. You're helping us heal.
You give a little hope that like if you can make it through this, maybe I can too. And you start to look at things differently.
Become part of the family.
Absolutely. And it is very, and like we always say at our panels, we're like, we don't need any more family members. Like we're good.
No one is that close. We don't need any more members of this club.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I do think it's just natural though for if you go through something like we've all been through, you are drawn to people that have gone through it just because they totally get it. They understand birthdays are different. They understand holidays are always different.
Explain how you're feeling.
Absolutely.
Everybody gets it. And there is comfort in that.
And you always like, and that's
Yeah.
where too, like even Mother's Day, like I know from my aunt, Mother's Day is never gonna be the same.
To the time period.
Right.
I mean, mine at least was a week before. So I feel like I at least have a week.
Right.
Before I know I have to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was always, but it was,
Day.
for us, it was Dave's, it was Mother's Day, it was his birthday. I mean, we had.
And that's where I can relate too, because Corey's birthday and our anniversary was in September, and the crash was in September too. And so, like, it's like all right there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and so one thing that's very, we touched on the organ donation just being a big part of our journey. So after Dave was killed, 2 days later was his birthday. So instead of planning a funeral, which we did plan, we still all went to the horse races. We still all had our big party. Which was very hard, and it turned into this like celebration of life versus whatever, and it was hard. It was awful. I'm sure people at Fairmount Park was like, these people are like so sad over there, like they're losing a ton of money or something. It's like, no, we were just worried about our day. But it was all of his friends came. Like we probably had 150 people.
That's
like
incredible.
Everyone came,
he
and
had
it was
one amazing party.
Yeah, we had his birthday party,
No,
and
I
it's
think that. So we did a similar thing with Grace. Like a 30-year-old does not need a funeral.
right.
A 22-year-old does not need a funeral. 23-year-old does not need a funeral. So celebrating the life, there's a time for grieving, and you obviously were grieving hard.
Oh, absolutely. But it was just, but it was better to be together than.
And you try to see the joy in it, even as awful as that sounds.
Right.
Doing something he would have enjoyed and what he wanted.
Yes, exactly. And we all did talk about like funny things, and and everyone we laughed and cried and had pictures, and it was the best night.
Yeah. Quote,
but that day, right? But that day, so fast forward, we're going through, when you do an organ donation, everything is very sealed and private and locked up. But you can, like, if they wanted to reach out and say thank you, or if they wanted, they can go through the organization and provide like a letter with no names, and then another letter with no names. So
I'm too nosy for that.
Down the road, my aunt did get a couple letters, but one in particular was a letter from a man named Bob, which we love because my grandpa was Bob.
Real name?
Yes,
I didn't know if they gave you a
big
big
real name.
I
Bob.
need to know.
And my grandpa was Bob, and my nephew,
wow.
Dave's nephew, was Bobby, and so he received David's heart on David's birthday. So May 13th was when he received David's heart. Which, when you get an organ donation, your new like birth date is like the date you got your donor. Wow. It's like your new birthday, or it's like a special day kind of a thing. That was also Bob's son's birthday, who was killed previously, not by impaired driving or anything like that, but he had a son who had passed. So he reached out to my aunt, and they connected, and then they connected enough where they were like, okay, if you both agree, you can meet. So that very first Walk Like Mad that we had, Bob came, and we all got to meet him, and Bob's been like part of the family now, and and on Dave's birthday, we all are like, happy birthday, Bob. Like, so,
Well, and that has to be bittersweet for him too, because somebody had to lose their life in order for him to keep his.
Right.
So, you know what I mean?
And he's
there are no coincidences.
No.
Right.
The timing was perfect.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, and he's been such a big, so Dave had a daughter who was 8 at the time that he passed, and Bob drove up. Brianna just graduated from college, and he drove down to Cape to like be at the graduation, and
that gives me chills.
I know.
Like,
and we
have
she wanted a tattoo because she's her daddy's girl. She wanted a tattoo of David's heartbeat. So Bob went and got an EKG.
Oh my goodness! This is like book worthy, and it's
so
real
sweet.
life.
It's very, but that's where my family has found so much comfort in that stuff, knowing like David lives on in multiple people, and just having that connection. And that was, and like I said, our first event that our family did with Mad didn't have a walk, which is like a fundraising event at the time. And my aunt owned a Curves for Women, which was like a fitness center. And I worked for them because I was in college still. We were like, we need to do something. So let's do this walk event, and that, just something we can do that's fun.
How many years has that gone on?
So it'll be, I think this year, 13 or 14 years. Wow. It's 2013 was our first one.
Much money you've raised?
Oh gosh. It's probably the first year, it's funny, the first year we were like, we want to raise $5,000, like whatever. And we raised like right at 13, which is Dave's number is 13. So we were like right at 13,000. And there's been years where we've raised 30,000. There's been years where we've raised 20. Like, so yeah, it's just, and what we love, it's been a significant fundraiser. And what we love about it is, one, all the money stays in St. Louis and it goes to victim services. So we know that it's going to people that we would want it to go to. And two, families can come together and just be somewhere but not sad. MAD does a lot of like events that can be a little somber because they are being respectful of the families and things that they've lost. So, but this is something that people can come to where if you start crying, that's fine. But like most of the time we can just, we can talk about our family members and everyone kind of understands. So it is fun. It's a great event.
Not to go. Law enforcement comes.
Law enforcement comes, and sometimes we have like a bubble machine, or like it's just a fun morning for families.
That's awesome.
So yeah, and we're doing our walk this year on October 5th. If you go to @Mad Heartland on Facebook, there'll be information about the walk. If you ever want to come,
add that in the description.
Yes, but it's very, like I said, that was something our family. That very first walk, it was basically the Weinstein family, friends and family of Dave walk. Like it was for a man. Right. It was all of our family and friends. And then since then it's grown, obviously. But Dave's friends still come, and it's just a way for us to keep connected with people.
I think it's important to note too that like you don't have to lose somebody or be directly impacted to like support
absolutely.
And advocate. Like you can get involved now before it happens.
Right. Well, and that's where I always
for businesses.
Exactly. Well, and that's what I always say too. Like we had one year we had a cheerleading team from one of the local high schools come and like be our like cheerleaders at the finish line.
Oh, fun.
But I was like, it was so good for them to see
how many people
were there that have lost someone, and like the sign, we put up signs of loved ones that have been injured or hurt or killed, and that alone is very impactful.
Yeah. You're walking. What is it? Half mile one way, half mile the other.
Yes.
And it goes nearly the half mile. Of pictures.
Just all the families and different people.
And that's just the pictures that people have agreed to
use.
That
right.
have showed up.
Right. The people that we know about. So yeah, that's a big, like I said, that's always been our family's baby, just because we've always pretty much run it for MAD so that they just have to show up.
That's nice.
What's been one of the hardest experiences that you've had during your time at MAD? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
Yes, I have one, and I'm very... I get teary. I'm an emotional person,
after a while,
but I am very strong. Like I can be very, especially in the courtroom, I can be very strong. There's one case that still makes me like, whoo. And it was my first case that I was helping a family in the juvenile court system. So the juvenile court system is very different. So I'm work in the legal field. I work for attorneys. I'm not an attorney, thankfully. But I work for them.
Finish law school. Noted.
No, we need good attorneys, but just not me. So I know I've always been involved in the legal field. I worked for the prosecutor in St. Charles for a little bit. I worked for the law firm.
Was that before or after you lost Dave?
That was after I lost Dave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious, when the passion
but not
comes.
Yes, exactly. But I've always been in, like, I always either wanted to be a lawyer or something along those, like, legal field.
Olivia,
something.
Law and Order.
Exactly. Basically, Olivia Benson. So I knew the due process part, right? Like, I know the legal system because I'm in it. So even with Dave's stuff, like I knew what to expect. Like I actually did know more than, some of our other family members, but more on like the civil side and things like that. I've had zero interaction in the juvenile court system. Know nothing about it. Yeah. Other than I know that it's very protected, right? Because these are minors, even though they committed a crime, they're minors. So they have different, rules and regulations that follow how they're handled. So this was a case in, I think it was Jefferson County again, where a 19-year-old girl was killed by another, I think she was 16, and that girl was a twin, the girl that was killed. And I have twin girls.
Were they in the same car together?
No.
Okay.
So she was on
Not
her way
that
home
that
from
matters,
work.
but-
She was on her way home from work. It was a wrong way crash. I think Highway 21, where there's been countless wrong way crashes for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I will never forget meeting that family because they were a beautiful family. The mom was adorable. Dad was stoic and strong, and just everything you think of when you think of a family that, I don't know, just this wonderful family, this beautiful family. Siblings, multiple siblings, and then these twin girls who were adorable. And Hannah's picture, like, she's just strikingly beautiful, and all the stories about, like, just them telling stories about her and all, like, I just remember being like, that was one of the first cases where I was like, this is like really hard for me to listen to them talk about this girl, and then to be told, you only, like, 2 of you can go in. Mad, you can't go in. Like, because of the juvenile court system is very, so it's all dependent on what the judge will allow, what the other side will allow. And so watching that family be like, you know, you can't, this may not, the other thing is, once she was sentenced, you don't know the sentence.
Stop.
Because it's not, it's all sealed. So you don't know. So she may have gotten, like,
there is no
jail
closure.
time, but not, you don't know how much, or you don't know. There was so little information that family got that it was almost painful to watch them
That's not fair.
experience it. And then,
because there's no justice.
right. And it was very,
even
and it was
on our
very,
best days, there's barely any. So for
Right.
them to not have
But this is
questions answered,
specifically no justice. You
Right.
don't
it's not
know
fair.
anything.
you don't know. And the thing is that young girl who committed the crime, you know, we don't, where it's like, I knew Dave's person was going to the women's prison. Like, we knew where she was going to be, whether we wanted to know or not. You know, we knew how much time she served. We knew this. We knew all these steps to it. But this family, listening to them hear that, you know, first of all, the effects of the crash, they all read impact statements, and they were beautiful. Like, they really did a wonderful job, which is extremely, if you have to stand up in front of someone, and the girl is sitting right there, and you have to just bleed your heart out. And the mom held that picture so tight and told her story, and it was so impactful. And I'm supposed to be the person that's, like, supporting this family, and I can't stop crying. Like, I am just like waterworks, and I'm like, I'm supposed to be the helper. Like, I can't do this. And I just will never forget that family ever, because I know, because those 2 girls, I just kept thinking about my girls. Like, there's no way, if one of them passed, that the other would survive. Like, they're just, they're twins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That, and then, like, as a child or a twin.
Last time I thought I would bring in some tissues.
No, you're fine.
I didn't. Just use your sleeve.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's allowed here. Hot Mess Expresses.
Yes.
Right.
What were you saying? I interrupted.
No, you're fine. Gosh, no, just, like, being a twin too and having to see, like, your face, you know what I mean?
Well, and
like,
I just think about
not
their
your
birthday
face, but it
every year. I
is,
think
yeah.
about their birthday, because I'm like, how do you have your birthday without your sister? Right. Like, and my girls fight all the time. Like, they do not love being twins because it's so hard to share everything. Like, you share everything, right? You have to share your friends. You have to share your birthday. You have to share. I mean, there's sometimes when I'm like, I don't know if those are your pants or her pants, but you have to share. Like, it doesn't matter. They're clean, right? But that's where watching this family and knowing that birthday, like, it's hard on Dave's birthday. How do you celebrate your birthday without your sister? Like, the twin part of that just crushed me.
Survivor's grief too.
Oh,
like, why did it happen to her? Why am I here?
Right.
We're the same. So
yeah, no, that's one that I always like, and
with good reason.
Yeah, and the family, like, you know, I've seen them here and there, but we're not extreme. You know, they were, with their journey was very difficult. They moved on, and you know, needed to move on.
On that note, how do you take care of yourself?
Do
you ever feel like it's just too heavy?
No, I don't. I mean, I should, I think. There's
You're
times when I
special
probably
because
should.
I do.
There's times when I probably
I say
should.
that because I don't want this fight. I never asked for
Right.
this. We've said it like
I wish it wasn't mine to do.
Yes.
This is not fun.
Right.
I don't want to be here. I love the logo, but I hate it.
Cute. The coffee mugs are kind of neat, but that's
Yes.
about it.
We didn't choose this journey, so sometimes when I'm like this deep in it,
Right.
I look around and I don't recognize myself anymore.
Yeah.
Like I am solely.
Yeah. I joke and say
angel mom.
Corey
Yes,
would
yes.
never recognize the destiny that's here today. Like, I am not the same person. And nobody
It
would
changes
expect me
you.
to be.
No,
but
yeah.
I miss, like, the naive me that didn't know this pain and this hurt. You know?
Absolutely.
Like, I don't want this
And
fight.
that's where self-care is so important because
Yeah.
you could easily become overwhelmed with all of this.
Yeah.
And you have, like you said before, a very positive outlook on
Yeah.
life. So what's the secret? What do you do that keeps you healthy?
Well, I do have boundaries. I will say that is one thing that I've learned over the years. And like at one point, I wanted to work for MAD and be the MAD person and run MAD Missouri.
Yeah.
And I've quickly learned that I'm a wonderful volunteer, but I think if I worked and lived in it, I don't think I could handle it.
It
Where
wouldn't be healthy for
I
you.
used to always think, you know, for people to work in victim services, whether it's a victim advocate for a court or MAD or, you know, Alive, which is like the
Arrive Alive?
yeah, or well, just the domestic violence
Oh,
organization
okay.
that's
Yeah.
so wonderful. Like, I used to think there's no way you could do that job without having to experience it. And then as the years have gone on, I actually think people who work for MAD that don't have a connection sometimes are protected because
Yeah, that's a good point.
you aren't where there
You're not
was
dealing with
times
your own pain.
right
job.
there was
It's not a
times
trigger.
right well there was times when I'm volunteering where I'm like I'm getting really, especially after like that one case in particular, I remember thinking this is really bothering me, like it's really getting to me, like I don't have to go to the next hearing because I'm a volunteer, so if I need a break I don't have to do that.
So you figured out where your boundaries
Yeah,
are.
so I
You
do.
don't
And I know
to
that
go
I have to take
everything.
times away from it. There's times when I have to, but I also find so much joy in the other things. There's the heavy work at MAD, whether it's victim impact panels or like victim service stuff. There's, you know, a couple of those a year. And then the rest of the year is like celebrating officers and doing other things.
And you,
So it's
I think just reading you as a human,
Mm-hmm.
I think celebrating officers like feeds your soul.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems like you get a lot
Yes.
of joy out of that.
Yes. And like we have opportunities where sometimes we can go and speak to the police academy, which is one of my
like
favorite
that.
things to do because it's these young officers who there's a lot of, you know, what are you going to be? What kind of officer are you going to be? You know, do you want to be a detective? Do you want to go into crime, this kind
Or
of
do you wanna
crime?
be
this,
Olivia Benson?
right. Do you want to go into, other things? So,
All of your references.
yes.
I don't get because I don't watch them.
Law and Order.
yes.
My fictional hero.
Right. But that's where I have met so many young officers who were like, you know, it wasn't until I met like a true DWI road guy that I realized how important this is. And you know what I mean? Those are the things that I love hearing those stories. And so when we go to speak at the academy, we normally go on the night that they do like a wet lab where they bring in people to drink.
I always wanted to
And then
do
they
that
test-
for myself.
Yeah,
I
and
want to
then-
know how it feels. Sign me up.
Yeah.
For real.
And then the officers train on those
think it'll be
individuals and they
therapeutic.
test them to see like, you know, where the limits are and different things like that. And they, so we normally speak on that night. So it's great because it's a great opportunity for them to hear kind of our story and then go out and, you know, see how it applies. But also to remind them that for us as an officer, we've heard time and time again of people who have been pulled over and let go
Yep.
because they didn't want to deal with
Right.
the paperwork,
the
this,
court.
the that. It takes an hour, like to book someone, take them, make sure they find a safe ride home. You know, all that stuff that comes along with it.
So it makes it extra special when you're rewarding these or giving
Yes.
them awards.
So
through MAD.
officers that have
All hard work.
100 for the year, like
a lot of
that's a lot of work. it's a lot of time and effort. And, you know, and I've been fortunate enough to do a couple of ride-alongs. And when you do a ride-along, you really do see firsthand what they're dealing with, whether it's someone's like getting sick on the floorboard or, you know, like.
Do you ever watch the TikToks of the arrest of DWI and the nonsense that goes on?
Oh, and it's all, I'll never.
They keep their cool.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They repeat it 80, 90
and they
times.
just go through, and they're just, and most of the officers, and obviously in any profession there's good and bad, but all the officers that we've dealt with especially in DWI world, they just really do, they're out there and they treat people with kindness. I mean, when you watch them give field sobriety tests and it's like the person's falling over and they're just like, oh, they help them up and they just roll on. And I'm like,
right, let's try,
you know,
again.
And it's just so, but we always just really push with them that every individual that, even if, you know, for the officers, when you pull someone off the road that's impaired, even if they hire the best attorney and they get it pled down to careless and imprudent driving or some kind of fine, you did your job that night. You got them off the road and you probably saved a life. So that's the thing that I always want to hit home with law enforcement is just how important that is to get them off the road.
And I can't remember, but it was a MAD event that I was at. I want to say it was one of the saturation nights. But there was a chief, I believe, that said something like that, or maybe it was someone else that said when they train new officers, they always say when you pull someone over and it looks like it's going to be a DUI, DWI stop, you're saving that person's life plus countless others.
Yeah.
And just keep that in your head.
Because you'll never know.
No matter what the paperwork, no matter how time consuming, you are potentially saving their lives and other people's.
Yeah, for sure. And that's like, so it's very rare that you would ever be able to stop like a murder in progress, right? Like as an officer, how many times?
But that's technically, I guess, what this is.
But when you pull someone over, if coming over that hill, they're going like the wrong way on the highway, like you just stopped a murder. Like it's pretty amazing when you think of it like that versus.
I always say that the day that like I finally eventually die when I'm like 106 or something, you know?
You have it on the calendar.
Yeah. That God or whatever y'all believe in better have a slideshow of everyone that I saved. All of the faces have to flash there. And that's why I survived. He didn't have the slideshow ready.
Yep.
So
no, I agree. I think that's good.
And I hope all these cops get one too.
Yep.
So
I hope so
when
too.
I go, I'll make sure that they get
their slideshow.
We'll revamp Heaven to include a slideshow.
No, that's so good.
In your time at MAD, have you seen any changes? Just to give us a little bit of hope.
Yes, I absolutely do. Well, I mean, I do think some of the biggest changes that I've seen are in not legislation, unfortunately. I think that's an area where we have to work. But some of the changes that I've seen, especially at the local level, are judges and prosecutors who are holding people more accountable, which is good. Because I will say, I feel like in the past, there was so much more pleading things down. You know, I had an officer tell me just recently that there was a case where, let's just say, someone was able to maybe like plead down because they turned someone else in. And it was a situation where it was like one of those. And the prosecutor was sort of like, no, like we're going to charge this. Good. That's not that opportunity. And he's like, I really think MAD's presence around this area made the difference in that. And I think that's so nice. Very cool to hear. Yes. And I do think, and I will say, I get asked that so many times, like how, like, don't you get discouraged? Like people are still doing it. Like whatever. And I do, but but I'm not a quitter. So like, you know, where it's like,
I wish I was,
where I do feel like there's people that have been like, okay, I spoke. And I do think like right now is a great time for me to speak, and I'm perfectly happy with it and I'm good, right? Yeah. And you know, maybe 10 years from now there'll be someone else in Missouri who can spearhead some of the other big things, and I can take a break if I, you know, want to. But I do think as long as Dave's story is there to be told, I'll tell it. And as long as someone will sit at a victim impact panel, I'll share. You know, I think those are the things that, as long as there's kids in the classroom.
Could you, so this isn't on our paper of questions, but it just popped into my mind. David has a bill that's kind of, that his story is behind. Is
yes. So, well, he did. It didn't. I don't think it went. This year's legislative efforts did not go very far.
I'm excited to hear more.
But it is. A Representative Sharp reached out to my aunt about attaching Dave's name to a bill that would be a more of a DWI deterrent kind of bill. So there's nothing specific.
Is like for 0.15 and up.
Yes.
Right?
And so, and I will say, I remember having conversations with Mad at like the national level about this, where there is a lot of talk about deterrent bills or kind of prevention measure bills with DWIs. So like if someone's a 0.15 or above and it's their first offense, they would get an ignition interlock.
Yeah. On first offense.
On first offenses.
Yeah.
So originally, Mad's sort of like, well, everyone should have an ignition interlock on their first offense.
Instantly what I thought.
And I am totally, and I think that's very normal for us to feel that way. So then when I back up to not being a mad person and just being a normal person, if you think, for me, even if it's 0.15 or above, like it's a starting point.
Still a step in the right direction.
So it's a step in the right direction. And so that's where.
To consider where you're at 0.15, you're significantly impaired.
And Dave's person was 0.158.
What was yours?
Well, we don't have a number.
You don't have a number. Mm-hmm. We were 0.24, I believe.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's way up there.
Yeah, it would have affected.
Yeah, but 0.158
ridiculous.
Was Dave's, but 0.15, if you're driving at that level, then and it's a first time offense, you absolutely should get an ignition interlock. So I have so where some people are like, oh no, that bill's not like good enough. For me, any bill is, and the same goes for, so that was the surrounding this bill that Dave's particular one was talking about getting ignition interlocks over 0.15, which I think is great. And hopefully next year they'll continue to add that with whatever bills. I know. Next year's going to be busy.
I'm going to live at that Capitol.
There's so many
things. I'm not
things.
Cry this
right.
It's okay.
But I will say too, the other bills that I like, the diversion program bills, are ones that are also very kind of controversial with Mad National, whether they support them or not.
And you're talking about the HALT Act?
No, the HALT Act is a little bit different. The diversion programs are when someone gets a DWI and then they enter into like a treatment court.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so, and I always think of this as, again, and this is me as Jen, not as like a Mad representative. If someone's going to go through those diversion programs, I specifically am thinking of Franklin County has a phenomenal drug court.
Okay.
So if you go through that treatment program and it's long and you have to like, there's so many things. You have to go to counseling. You have to go to this.
Yeah.
It's a huge inconvenience. You have to pay. You have to do all the stuff.
And also life-changing if it works for you.
Right. They're drug tested. They're this. You can't have alcohol in the program. You can't have drugs. It's if you work that program and it takes a while, they will reduce your sentence by like a class. So if you were a class, whatever, misfelony, it could possibly go to a misdemeanor. And there's a lot of people within Mad that are like, no, you should get the fullest extent. But for me, if that person truly is going through the program and they are doing the steps, they're changing, then we do need to have some. Yeah. It's that almost like restorative justice.
Yeah, an incentive to do the right thing and to heal. And, and so like you said before, alcohol is not the problem, but the abuse of the alcohol is. So if this is healing that abuse that you had, then you should have an incentive.
No, and that's what. So I think of, and I've met so many people.
Program, so if you can make it through the program,
absolutely,
then you're doing something
right. So, and if you get out of the diversion program and you would reoffend, obviously the consequences would be extremely severe, which I would hope. But I think programs like that is a good idea. I do think those could be successful. I know St. Charles County, St. Louis County. I mean, there's most of the counties around us have some sort of drug court or treatment program. But like I said, the diversion bill, there was another one this year. And I don't think that one passed through because nothing passed through.
Yeah, it was a rough year.
Yeah. And then again, Bentley's Law. I always think about Bentley's Law, which was the child support for kids who are left behind. So Dave's daughter technically would have, they would have qualified for some sort of, that situation. and people are always like, oh, well, like child support for their, or child maintenance or whatever you would call it. The important thing to think about too is when someone hits you and they're impaired, if they don't have insurance,
yes,
or
there's nothing to get.
If they're underinsured, there's no repercussions. Like your family really is left with a huge, not only a loss, you have a huge financial burden.
Right. I've shared multiple times already that like we were given $25,000 that we had to split 35 or 40% with a lawyer to pay for a funeral and all the hospital bills and to rebuild my life. And
right. And think if you had 2 other children that you had to raise and, you know, and you're grieving and this. And so that, when I first heard about Bentley's Law, I was like, why isn't this is so common sense that, you know, it doesn't necessarily apply. If you would get a big payout settlement, then yes, you wouldn't qualify for Bentley's Law. It's like an either or. But if Bentley's Law would pass in Missouri and someone hits you and kills, God forbid, kills a parent, and that family members left behind to raise them, that money would be such a blessing and like a way for them to support their family after, you know, such a tragedy.
And when I first heard it, I was like, well, that wouldn't have helped me in any way, but it could have, because it could have deterred. You know what I mean? It could have changed the mindset. It could have scared or made them think differently.
Just like,
and so it does help. It helps everybody.
You're supposed to have it, but sometimes you don't.
Right.
And
or you have low limits, which is like even scarier. Right. I mean,
and all of these programs, the idea is in an ideal world, of course, they would keep you from doing it.
Right.
It may not work. And just like the fines and the extra charges and all of the other things, sometimes that doesn't work. And we see people getting 4 or 5, 6. That's not an excuse not to try for it.
Right.
It's not an excuse not to push for bills that will deter, because it will affect some people. It will keep some people from doing it. And then on the off chance we have situations where children are left after their parents are gone and somebody's got to raise them, and that's expensive, it will theoretically help that person raise them.
And even if it doesn't stop somebody from drinking and driving again, like maybe it'll stop them from reoffending again. You know what I mean? Like every step's a step in the right direction.
Right. And that's what we always say, even with our, you know, we always go back to victim impact panels, but we learn so much from them, I think. You know, when you have a room of 50 people, even, you know, at the beginning we were like, if we could only reach 1, it'd be good. And then it's like, we want to reach 10, we want to reach 20. Like
the 1 has a ripple effect.
Right. But it is. It's very like, you know, it's that if we could just get, and I truly believe that. I think that is how this works, is we keep talking, we keep sharing. One thing I love with Matt is they always say people's names. Like it's such a big deal to say someone's name. Really so is. And I remember going through that with Dave, like when we lost him, people would be like, how you doing, or like whatever, like, you know,
they tiptoe
around saying, or like, they wouldn't say his name, right?
You know what I mean?
And they wouldn't say their name, and it was like, you mean David? Like,
yeah. You know what? This was the best. So everybody's always quick to say, what don't you say to a grieving family?
Yes.
But this was the best one. And it was, she walked up to me. She didn't ask how I was doing, anything. She just said, tell me one thing about Grace that you loved. And I was like, okay,
I'll tell you 100 things. Right, exactly. No, it is. It's so.
It gives you permission to talk. It gives you permission to say their names. And then I think it helps them too, because it breaks the ice.
Out of curiosity, had she lost a child or
no
before? Because I just feel like that was such a special thing to say, and I always wonder, like, I go up and talk to people and I'm basically speechless because I know that like nothing I say is good, so I just smile. You know, but like that was good.
It was so good. And then she actually even texted me later and said, that was really awesome. I feel like I knew her. And I'm like, it makes me feel so happy.
Yes.
I love that.
Of the terrible
sadness.
Awful sadness.
Yes.
It was like,
so
man,
good.
somebody knows about her.
Look at that. I'm getting 2 takeaways. I'm buying Uber gift cards for those barrel of booze.
Yes.
And now that's what I'm asking somebody. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
that's good.
We talked a lot about MAD.
Yes.
And how would somebody go about, like, if this touched somebody and they want to volunteer, what's the steps for that?
So, I mean, the first easiest step is just mad.org. There's tons of information. There's tons of statistics. That's the one nice thing about a big corporation is they have the funding to do research, and they can pull statistics, and they're working directly with NHTSA. Yes, they're working directly with NHTSA. They're working with all the big
highway safety,
traffic
safety, traffic.
Yes. Yes. But they are the ones who are the end all be all for roadway safety in the government, right? And so I think having those connections, plus just being such a well-known organization, that is awesome. But they through theirs
have to be a victim or a survivor to volunteer.
No, you don't have to have any tie to the mission to volunteer. But obviously, so starting there, and then at Mad Heartland on Facebook is the best way to reach, like, locally if you're in St. Louis or in Kansas City even. That's more of like a Mad Missouri. But in all honesty, just anything for me when you're looking at a place or a volunteer organization or anything like that is just talking to everyone, finding your place within that organization, because that's the one cool thing I think about MAD is there really is a place for everyone, whether it's a walk or a victim impact panel or dealing with law enforcement or dealing with the youth. Like there's so many ways, or legislation's huge. They always need people making phone calls. I mean, you guys know it's like the phone calls and this and that, and just
have to be a person who wants to get out in front of a crowd.
Right, exactly. You don't have to be
the quieter.
Absolutely. And that's where, to be honest, I enjoy the behind. I end up being in front of the stage a little more than I like, but because other people don't like talking and I don't mind it.
I feel like that's how our husbands are. They're like behind the scenes, like
absolutely
supporting us, but like we're the face of like our mission.
Yeah. There's always a place for everybody, and that's the good thing. You never have to feel like you have to push yourself into an area that you're uncomfortable,
right?
Because there's other options where you might be comfortable.
Totally.
Have we missed anything that you'd like to mention? Anything that's on your heart?
I don't think so. I think we talked about pretty much everything. I'm super excited to see how you guys evolve in this and who you speak to, and I just am so supportive of everything you're doing, and I think it's really important for your families, and I hope everyone listens, because I do think there is a ripple effect, and I think you will make a difference.
I
do too. I can already see a difference being made. It's slow, but it's still happening.
Yeah.
And every move in the right direction is just progress.
It is. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I honestly looked forward to this. I couldn't wait to get you in here.
Oh, yay. I'm so happy to be here.
You were so good at talking. I didn't even have to go.
No, it's just natural.
You just hit all the points.
Of course.
And so, again, if anybody has any questions about volunteering, mad.org or Heartland Facebook page.
Yeah, so it's at Mad Heartland, MADD, and then Heartland all together.
And remind us real quick when the walk is.
It's October 5th at Creveport Park. Yay. And then the only other big event we have coming up that everyone is welcome to is Saturation Saturday on August 23rd, which is at Whitfield School. And all of that information will be on the Facebook page. But that's a super fun night where all the officers in the area go out on patrol, kind of saturate the city. There's grants that weekend because it's
nationwide, right?
Yes. Well, it kind of butts up to that. What is the Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over campaign? It runs at the same time because it's like the deadliest 100 days of summer, right? From May to the end of May to the beginning of September. Kind of runs through there.
Oh, I fit in there. I was looking at you to see if you fit in there.
I'm just
we fit in a little bit
by one day.
Yes. But they talk about that, but that Saturation Saturday is, there's grant funding available for the officers so that they're able to get, money to extra individuals working on those nights, which is super awesome with MoDOT.
And it's a good idea just to show your support.
Absolutely.
Show up and be there, even if you're not a victim or a survivor, just to be on their side because they have tough jobs and it's a tough business.
So that's August 23rd and then the walk's October 5th. So
awesome.
We got lots to do.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
We hope today's episode brought you comfort, understanding, and a renewed sense of hope. If you found value in our conversation, please consider sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it.
Until next time, hold on to hope, honor the memories of those that you love, and take one step at a time toward healing. You're not alone on this path. Take care and be well.